Alright, now let's talk about utility points for the Fury Specialization of Sith Marauder. Now please keep in mind that there is no one build that fits all situations, so you're going to have to take a look at the activity you're going to be doing and assign your utility points as needed. Also note that PvP and PvE use completely different loadouts. And lastly, please note that the following comments are of my own personal opinion, and other people's views on this matter might differ, and that's completely fine. That's one of the cool things about being able to assign these utility points, is you can tailor your combat ability to your playstyle. Alright, first off, let's start off with PvP, and most notably in the skillful tree. Now this has two extremely powerful utility points that I personally think are auto-include whenever I do anything PvP orientated. First off is Inexorable. What this does is it reduces the cooldown of Unleashed by 30 seconds, and as we know, Unleashed is our CC breaker, so being able to reduce that by 30 seconds is extremely powerful, especially since in PvP there's so much CC going around that you want to have this available as much as possible. Next is the utility point known as Brazen. This is really powerful because you build 2 Fury when attacked. This Fury building effect cannot occur more than once every 1.5 seconds. And even though that seems like a long time, the fact that you're building 2 Fury every time you attack is actually very noticeable. And the reason why this is so important is because in a PvP setting, you cannot always depend on Frenzy to get you your 30 stacks, because it has a cooldown of 2 minutes 15 seconds. And you know, in an ever-changing battlefield, you never know what might happen, and 2 minutes 15 seconds is actually quite a long period of time. So like I said, you know, you want to have this so you can get into your resource management much faster. Alright, now let's talk about skills that I don't use very often, and that is Overwhelm. What this does is Ravage and Mobilize the target for 3 seconds. Now, in this very specific specialization tree of Fury, you're already highly mobile, so you shouldn't really have a problem sticking on your target to get your damage in. But as per request from my Warzone group, sometimes I will take it if the group needs more CC. But if it's not specifically asked for, I tend to skip this. Now, 2 skills or 2 utility points that I personally never take in PvP, but you know, some people do like it, so I'm going to note them anyway, is Cloak of Carnage and Cloak of Rage. And these buff up your Cloak of Pain, which is a 1 minute defensive cooldown, so that, you know, it's a really good skill. So some people do take these, but I personally, I don't think they're very good in Warzone for the way that I personally play. So once again, that's personal preference and play style. Now, an ability or a utility point that I think no one should take as a Fury spec, regardless of playstyle, is Path Carver. What this does is Sweeping Slash deals 25% more damage. And as a Fury spec Marauder, in a PvP setting, you shouldn't ever be using Sweeping Slash, at least in my opinion. You have Smash, you have Mad Dash, and you have Dual Saber Throw as decent AoEs. I mean, Smash is actually an extremely strong AoE. Now, Sweeping Slash, it does so little amounts of damage that you don't want to be using it to accidentally, you know, wake up a Mez target or break someone's CC that they put on. So this is something that I think is a skip, an auto blackout. So out of these 2 are really good. This is situational. These are depending on the playstyle, and this one is never. Alright, now let's move on to the Masterful tree. Now, this skill right here, Subjugation, is, in my opinion, extremely strong and should also always be taken. For me, it's an auto-include whenever I PvP. And the reason for that is it reduces the cooldown of Disruption by 2 seconds. And as we know, Disruption is our interrupt. And that's really strong, especially when you're trying to take out healers, or if you're jumping on a merc, you know, that's trying to spam tracer missiles and whatnot. It's really strong. As an added bonus, it reduces the cooldown of Obfuscate by 15 seconds and increases its range by 6 meters. Now I'll get more into Obfuscate later, but just keep note that I really like Obfuscate a lot. I think it's extremely powerful. And as an added bonus, Cloak and Pain can be used while stunned. And as we know, in PvP you get stunned quite often. So being able to pop a defensive cooldown while you're under heavy onslaught is it's helpful. So, all right, now let's look at another skill, Relentless. This is also really powerful. Predation no longer requires or consumes fury, but will go on a cooldown for 30 seconds when activated. This is very important because, as we know, we don't want to be using our 30 stacks to activate this because we're going to need Berserk up whenever possible. And the fact that it puts it on a 30-second cooldown makes it very fast, so you can use this quite often. So, I really like this one right here. Next, let's talk about Phantom. This increases your movement speed by 15% and movement speed bonus of Force Camo by 20%. Additionally, increases the duration of Force Camouflage by 2 seconds. Okay, this is really good too. I highly recommend it. I don't always take it, but I pretty much take it 99% of the time. Just having that extra speed is really great. And you're going to notice you're going to use Force Camo quite often with Sith Marauder, so it's really nice to increase its duration by 2 seconds. Alright, now let's talk about skills I rarely take, and that's, where is it? Oh no, let's talk about skills I never take. Okay, so defensive roll. First off, reduces damage taken from area effects by 30% and increases internal and elemental damage reduction by 3%. On paper it sounds really strong, but when you're in a PvP setting, you want to be avoiding AoE damage as much as possible. And instead of taking this, I'd rather take my escape abilities. So this is something I don't ever take in PvP. Next is Strangulate. It reduces the cooldown of Force Choke by 15 seconds. Now for Fury, I tend to not take this because very specifically I save Force Choke for when I need an immediate interrupt while my disruption is on cooldown. So I'll use this to stop casters if I cannot disrupt them. But that's pretty much the only thing I use Force Choke for. I guess also if I'm in a one-on-one setting, say I just got jumped by an enemy Marauder, and I want to get a little bit more damage edge out of them, or if they're almost dead and I want to stun them so I can finish them off before they use their med pat. So that's one time I use Force Choke, but generally I'm saving my Force Choke, so I rarely see the cooldown reduction matter. Alright, now let's talk about Interceptor. Force Charge and Obliterate snare the target, reducing its movement speed by 50% for 6 seconds. While normally that sounds really strong, like I said earlier, you shouldn't need any abilities to stay on your target since you have quite a lot of mobility. Now the thing is, you're already jumping in on them, so you shouldn't really need this ability. So I skipped this. Now let's go on to the Heroic Tree. So here's a skill that I really like. It's not required, but I think it's really good, and it's called Unbound. When predation is applied or refreshed, it purges movement impairing effects. Additionally, the movement speed bonus of predation is increased by 30%. So let me give you some examples of where I like it a lot. And that's if you're playing objective-based PvP, when you're playing those 8-on-8s, it's really nice to have that movement speed so you can get around to your objectives faster. Also, when predation is applied or refreshed, it purges movement impairing effects, so this is really good for, like, say when you get rooted by a sniper or whatnot. They can knock you back, and then you can activate predation and quickly close back that distance. So that's why I like this ability. I'm not saying it's an auto include, but for me I think it's really good. Now let's look at Expunging Camouflage. Force Camouflage removes all cleansable effects when activated, so that can cleanse roots, slows, and whatnot, but it can also cleanse dots, and it cleanses them all. So it's really nice for when you know the opponents that you're going to be matching up against. Say if you're running into them quite often and they have a lot of that type of stuff, you can grab this and purge all that type of stuff that you're getting on you. But you know, once again, this is it's all dependent on what you're going to be doing. All right, next let's look at Maiming Reach. This increases the range of Crippling Slash to 10 meters. Additionally, Crippling Slash now consumes 2 less rage and immobilizes the target for 3 seconds. Now here's the important key wording of this. This immobilization effect cannot be applied to the same target more than once every 10 seconds. That means you can immobilize multiple targets with this, just not the same one. Now here's the thing. This is also an ability that I only take as per request of my PvP group, and that's very rare also. So this is something I generally don't take. 90% of the time, maybe even 95% of the time, I won't choose this ability. Alright, now let's move on to Undying Rage, or Undying. What this does is it increases the duration of Undying Rage by 2 seconds and reduces its cooldown by 30 seconds. Okay, so this is kind of hard. So Undying Rage is extremely powerful. You're going to get a damage reduction of 99% for 6 seconds when you use Undying Rage. And, you know, this will increase the duration by 2 seconds, which is like a 30% increase in time. I don't know. I'm not very good with math, but that's you know, 2 seconds is a long time in PvP. And it reduces its cooldown by 30 seconds. So, you know, it has like a 3-minute cooldown, I believe. So it reduces it down to a 2.5-minute cooldown. Well, that on paper sounds really strong. Sadly, I don't pick Undying because, well, one, it's still 2.5 minutes. That's still a very long cooldown timer. And when we get to the legendary tree, I'm going to show you something that I tend to like to use instead if I was to allocate a utility point to that. So for now, I don't take this, and we'll link to that later. Now let's go to Brooding. Now, okay, this is personal opinion. I personally do not take Brooding ever when I go into PvP, but I do know some people that do like this for when they do solo ranked. Now, the reason that they've told me is that you always start the fight, you know, out of combat. So you have a chance to build up your 30 stacks. And then the fights are really quick because you're only fighting against 4 enemies, and it's a deathmatch. So for them, they like it in that situation. Everyone does agree that you should not be taking it in objective-based PvP. But once again, I don't take Brooding, but it's playstyle and personal preference. Alright, now let's look at Cloak of Annihilation. Pretty much each use of Battering Assault will reduce the active cooldown of Cloak of Pain by 3 seconds. I think this is a waste of a skill. But, you know, if someone's building a Cloak of Pain build, I guess it could be good. But when it comes to Fury Marauder, the only thing you're really using here is Battering Assault. You're not going to be using any of the other stuff. So, yeah. So I skipped this. Alright, now let's move on to the Legendary Tree. Now let's look at Ruthless Aggressor. Alright, so as we were talking about earlier, I really like Obfuscate. And what this does is Vicious Throw refunds 2 rage when used on a target affected by your Obfuscate, and can be used on any target affected by your Obfuscate, regardless of remaining health. So even if the target is at 100 health, you can Vicious Throw them, which is actually a large amount of damage. But not only that, activating Obfuscate grants you Ruthless Aggressor, reducing the damage you take from force and tech attacks by 75% for 6 seconds. That's a huge damage reduction. And it doesn't even matter who the target of your Obfuscate is. So let's say you Obfuscate a sniper, right? But, you know, his teammates are still, their damage gets reduced on you, because it doesn't say, you know, by the target. And also remember, the target that you have obfuscated is also blinded, so their accuracy is lower. So this is a really good defensive cooldown, especially since Obfuscate is on a 1 minute cooldown timer. So I really like this skill. I highly recommend it. Next, let's look at Blood Ward. Now, Blood Ward is, for me, pretty much an auto include. It's extremely strong. Activating Saber Ward grants immunity to stun, sleep, lift, and incapacitating effects for 6 seconds. And getting attacked while Saber Ward is active heals you for 3% of your maximum health. This healing effect cannot occur more than once every second. So first off, the healing, I never really noticed it. It's 3%. Doesn't really matter so much. But the immunity to incapacitating effects is extremely powerful in PvP. When you combine this with Gravity Vortex, which Force Crush triggers Gravity Vortex, granting you immunity to interrupts and all controlling effects for 6 seconds. Wow, that's just it's really strong. You can chain pretty much Saber Ward into a Force Crush, giving you 12 seconds of immunity to CC effects. That's just a really long time. That's really powerful. And then of course, you have your cooldown on Unleashed reduced by 30 seconds. So between these 3 things, you can be very hard to CC. I think this is probably one of the most powerful legendary utility points across all classes. I think this is really good. So yeah, once again, personal preference, but I pretty much always take Blood Ward. Alright, now let's talk about Through Victory. Now, this is really strong. I know a lot of people that do use this to very high success. And what it is Mad Dash can be used while immobilized, and it purges movement impairing effects when activated. It also deals 50% more damage, and additionally, the cooldown of Mad Dash is reduced by 10 seconds. So Mad Dash already is on a pretty quick cooldown, I think a minute. So you're reducing it down to 50 seconds. So you have a movement impairing breaker, on this every 50 seconds. So that's really good on, I know, like I said, I know a lot of people who use it to high success. I personally don't take this though, and that's because I'm not very good with the trajectory of Mad Dash, and that's playstyle, personal playstyle. I highly recommend taking this. It's just me personally, I'm not very good with using Mad Dash. So yeah, once again, personal preference. So for me, I use Predation instead. But if you can, if you use this in conjunction with Unbound, you're having looping CC breakers pretty much. So yeah, it like I said, depends on your personal playstyle. I personally think Predation is enough for me to get through that stuff, but Now let's talk about skills I don't take. First off, Thirst for Rage. Bloodthirst generates 12 rage when activated, and you heal for 1% of your maximum health whenever you activate an ability that consumes rage. I don't think this is very good. I could be wrong, but for me personally, I wouldn't recommend it. Now let's talk about Interloper. I think this is a blackout skill. This is something definitely I don't take ever, and I don't think anyone in Fury Spec should ever spec into this. What it does is Force Charge grants Interloper, allowing you to activate Force Charge a second time. Interloper lasts up to 7.5 seconds and is removed if Force Charge is reused. If Interloper is not utilized by the end of its duration, Force Charge is placed on a 7.5 second cooldown. Additionally, Force Charge now builds to Fury. Now you already have 2 leaps. You shouldn't need another one, to be very honest. So I don't think anyone in Fury Spec should ever take this. Actually, in my opinion, it gets kind of clunky for me, in my opinion. So yeah, once again, I don't think this should be taken. Now, I guess if you're playing Hut Ball, I guess it could be really good. But like I said, you already have 2 leaps already. So yeah. All right, now let's talk about Hidden Savagery. Now this is an oddball for PvP. Some people love it. I don't take it when I PvP, but that's just me. So this is a very offensive skill. While Force Camouflage is active, you gain a charge of Hidden Savagery every 0.5 seconds. Each charge of hidden savagery increases the damage dealt by your next melee attack by 4%, and it stacks up to 12 charges and lasts up to 6 seconds after exiting forced camouflage. So this can be an extremely large boost in your damage if you do it right before a crit prepped Furious Strike. So, you know, you can really burst someone down if you use this utility point. But for me, my personal playstyle is I kind of like having access to all these root breakers. So I personally don't take it, but I can see it being extremely potent, especially in solo rank queue. So I'm not going to write it off as a bad ability. You know, like I said, there are some who like it, and you know, having that extra bit of explosive damage is, you know, it can be really powerful. Anyway, so that's what I use for PvE. And once again, let me stress that this is all personal preference. So however you want to build your utility points, perfectly fine. Alright, now let's move into PvE. Now once again, you know, not all builds are usable or, you know, are the same. You might want to change it up depending on the exact operation that you're doing, or if you're doing flashpoints or whatnot. So you want to tailor it very specifically to the fight that you're doing. Alright, so now let's look at this skillful tree. Okay, first off, I still take Brazen. I really like it because, you know, sometimes you are under attack by certain mobs, so building this is really nice. There are times when you're going to steal aggro. I mean, there are times when a monster has, you know, an aggro dump or whatnot. So, you know, being able to build that fury, you know, in random places could help, especially during disjoins. Now, Cloak of Carnage, I think this is also a really good skill, and this increases the damage dealt by Cloak of Pain by 15% and increases its duration by 4 seconds. So this is increasing your, you know, your damage, even if it's just a little bit when you're being attacked. But also, this helps you stay alive quite longer if you pull aggro, because Cloak of Pain now has its duration increased by 4 seconds. So it's actually pretty good in PvE setting. Now another thing you might want to consider is Path Carver. If you know that there's going to be a lot of ads that you have to deal with, this can be really great. It's also really good for in-between fights while you're, you know, transversing from boss to boss. So, you know, this is something you might want to consider. Now moving into the next one, I always take defensive role in PvE, and that's because the damage and area effects in PvE are extremely strong, and you never know, sometimes you just get hit by them. Sometimes a boss just targets you with a big rock that he throws and whatnot. So, you know, you want to have that, but it also increases your internal and elemental damage reduction by 3%. So this adds up, you know, between this and Brazen. So you're getting 5% damage reduction against internal and elemental, and like I said, you know, bosses can hit really hard, so you wanna consider using this. Relentless is also really nice. Predation no longer consumes fury, but will go on a cooldown of 30 seconds when activated. So this is really great for, you know, when you need to dodge a lot of AoEs. Like there might be a phase where a boss is going to throw like 30 or 40 red circles on the floor. But it's also good for running around when you don't have access to your mount, your speeder. So sometimes you just want to make the run faster, so this helps a lot. Another skill that you want to consider is Subjugation. Now what this does is it reduces your disruption, like we talked about in the PvP section. So sometimes, you know, you're going to be on interrupt duty, and you know, if you need to be able to interrupt multiple different monsters from casting, or if you're on, you know, interrupting something very important against a boss, you know, this is really nice to have. So you, like I said, you want to know the fight that you're doing, and, you know, choose this if you think you might need that. Phantom is okay, you know, I don't take it personally unless I'm doing like some type of speed run when it comes to operations. So yeah, I generally leave this blank, but sometimes I'll take it if, you know, I say the guild wants to run a really quick ops where everyone has like 1 hour before they go to work or whatnot. Okay, I'll take it just to, you know, speed things up a bit. Strangulate, this I don't take this at all in PVE. More often than not, you can't really force choke bosses, and there's, you know, yeah, I don't think it's very important. You're not going to notice that cooldown reduction. Interceptor is purely for PvP. It doesn't really work in PvE, so this is also another blackout that I don't ever pick, ever. Alright, so now let's go into Heroic. Now, there's a very powerful utility point here called Brooding. It reduces the cooldown of Intimidating Roar by 15 seconds, which doesn't really do anything in PvE. I mean, I guess you could stun the certain ads and whatnot, but the important thing is you build up 30 Fury over the course of using Channel Hatred. This effect cannot occur more than once every 30 seconds. So you basically, when you use this, you can start every fight with enough stacks to activate Berserk, which means you still have Frenzy and open for activating a starting Bloodthirst. So you can Brooding to max stats, hit Berserk, Force Charge in, Frenzy and Bloodthirst your whole raid group. So this is an extremely large damage increase for, you know, the whole raid. So I highly recommend this. This is pretty much for me an auto include when it comes to PvE. I always take that. Alright, now let's go to the next one. Expunging Camouflage. Once again, I don't always take this, but sometimes, you know, a boss will have some really nasty dot that needs to be cleansed, and this is really good for alleviating your healers from the stress of having to cleanse the DPS. So instead of having them cleanse you, you can do it yourself. So for those fights that I know that there's a really nasty dot, I'll pick this. Unbound, when predation is applied or refreshed, it purges movement impairing effects. Additionally, the movement speed bonus of predation is increased by 30%. So yeah, same thing with Phantom. I'll take this when I just want to do a faster run. You know, we have an hour to do this operation, and we can't take mounts at certain sections, so this will really help. This will help the whole group transverse the map much faster. But it's not something I always take, so that's something you keep in mind. Maiming Reach is pretty much, it's a PvP only skill, so I don't ever take that. Cloak of Annihilation, I don't take this as well. Once again, you're only going to be using Battering Assault, so these two are pretty much blacked out. Alright, now let's talk about Undying. If I need to tank something, which is kind of weird because, you know, I'm playing a DPS class, but there are times when you might be tasked with kiting something or whatnot. That's the time that I'll consider using this, because this is pretty much a way to prevent pretty much all incoming damage. This is a save your life ability. So in those few occasions where I absolutely need that, then I'll pick it, but that's like 1% of the time or less. So I rarely take this. I usually skip over it. Alright, now let's move into the legendary tree, and I love this utility point for PvE. And basically, like I was saying earlier, what Hidden Savagery does is while Force Camo is active, you gain charge of Hidden Savagery every 0.5 seconds. Each charge of Hidden Savagery increases the damage dealt by your next melee attack by 4%, stacks up to 12 charges, and lasts up to 6 seconds after exiting Force Camo. So, you know, in my rotation, pretty much, you know, I'm gonna be like, I'm gonna Force Charge in, I'm gonna Ravage, or no, I'm gonna Berserk, Ravage, Raging Burst, right? In between Raging Burst, on my opener, I'm gonna hit Force Camouflage. That way, when this is done and it's ready to go on, my global cooldown is ready to go on my next ability, I'm gonna land a really strong Fury Strike. So I really like that. It's a huge damage increase. And then over time, you know, after that, my next Force Camo that I'm gonna use, I'm either gonna save it for my next crit loaded Fury Strike, or if I need to, I can use it before a crit loaded Raging Burst. But because Force Camo has a 45-second cooldown, you know, that's almost in line with my 6-piece set bonus. So, you know, if I can time it just right, you know, I should always be loading these Furious Strikes with a nasty hidden savagery. Alright, now let's talk about some other skills. First off, Thirst for Rage. Once again, I don't take this. I don't think it's very good. So for me, that's a skip. Interloper, that's a skip. I don't take this either. Blood Ward, I don't take it, but you know, maybe if I was kiting something, I don't know. I don't take it for PVE. Through Victory, there's another ability I don't really take for PVE. It's pretty much a skip. Now, okay, Ruthless Aggressor. We're coming back to this one. For PvP, it's really strong, but for PvE, now Obfuscate, very rarely. I don't think there's a boss that you can obfuscate in hard mode or nightmare. So pretty much the only time you would take this is if you know there's a certain target, say a really strong ad, that you need to take out and it can be obfuscated. Then you might want to consider this, because Vicious Throw is really strong. So yeah, you know, it really depends on the operation. So, you know, I don't know. But for bosses, the actual bosses themselves, they generally can't be obfuscated. That I can't think of one that can be off the top of my head. They're usually immune to these type of CC stuff. But you know, there are some that have ads, like really big dragons or whatnot, that can be obfuscated, and they need to be taken out extremely quickly. You know, or maybe there's some random like acolyte in the background that channels some really nasty dot. You know, so you know, being able to obfuscate them allows you the ability to Vicious Throw right at the start. So it increases your burst window against that type of stuff. You know, but you know, it's not required. You know, you don't honestly need to really take it. So it really just depends on the operation. Anyway, so you know, after looking at all that stuff, you still have one utility point that you can spend on, you know, whatever you want depending on what you're doing. So, you know, Path Carver is good, Phantom is good, Unbound, you know, however you want to do it. Expunging Camouflage, I always leave that one utility point as my final customization for whatever op that I'm going to be joining. Alright, so hope this all helped. One last thing is, please keep in mind that you cannot change utility points while you're in combat. So you need to do it before your party pulls a boss or a mob pack or whatnot. You also cannot change your utility points while you're inside a war zone, as well as while you're queued up for it. So if you're going to be doing PvP, make sure you allocate your utility points before your group queues up. Alright, so hope this video helped, and until next time, take care. Goodbye.